Hello, listeners. You are listening to a very special episode of That's Auntertainment. I am your pop culture maven, Jeff Malone. It's a bit of a semi-annual tradition, or a regular tradition, that when the classic game show Jeopardy airs its Tournament of Champions, I produce a reaction episode. My co-host Aunt Beth doesn't always keep close track of Jeopardy. When we first covered Jeopardy in our full-length episode about the show, she was on the microphone, but she doesn't always catch all the tournaments of champions in their entirety. But my dad, former Jeopardy contestant Bob Malone, he usually does. So I'm like, well, I have some things to say. And I'm like, Dad, do you have things to say too? And often just so happens that I am visiting my parents' house around the time that Tournament of Champions has recently aired. So, yeah, it's our latest That's Auntertainment Tournament of Champions reaction episode. And indeed, as I just promised a few seconds ago, sitting next to me is my guest co-host for this episode, my dad, Bob Malone.
Hello. Yes, when Jeff asked me, I said, I'm not sure. And then I thought about it. I said, yeah, I do have some things I'd like to discuss about it. So here I am.
All right. So we'll get right into it. For those of you who didn't watch the Tournament of Champions or just want to be reminded, or just like hearing us talk about whatever, if you just like the sound of my voice, thank you very much. And well, here we go. So the Tournament of Champions wrapped up on March 19th. That's the 2024 edition I'm talking about. The finals featured the dynamic trio of Ben Chan, Troy Myers, and Yogesh Raut as the contestants, and Yogesh ended up victorious. They played a first to three victories format, which they debuted in the previous Tournament of Champions. Yogesh made it to 3 wins after 6 games. Ben had won 2, and Troy had won 1. This was billed as the largest Tournament of Champions field in Jeopardy history. It was a total of 27 contestants, and it aired after a series of several other special tournaments. In fact, all of season 40 thus far has featured returning contestants, no new contestants. Eventually they'll get back to that, but we're going to focus on the Tournament of Champions, but we'll talk about the other tournaments as well. As we're talking, Jeopardy is in the midst of the Jeopardy Invitational Tournament, the first ever, where they've invited back just a selection of various memorable former contestants. And yeah, so we're gonna just talk about our overall reactions to the Tournament of Champions. We're recording this on Easter weekend, and I'll be taking some time to tinker with it, editing it. It should be in your podcast feeds by the following Sunday, April 7th, unless I feel like doing an early release. We'll see what happens. But, this isn't the most up-to-date Jeopardy podcasting. If you want that, maybe you could also listen to the official Jeopardy podcast, Inside Jeopardy. I'll give them a buzz. But these are evergreen thoughts that we have about the 2024 Tournament of Champions. They'll apply a week later or a month later, a year later, 10 years later, unless we change our minds about things. I don't know. What do you think, Dad? What are your general reactions to this year's Tournament of Champions, and do you think you'll have the same opinions 10 years from now?
Well, I have thought them over, so they're my well-considered thoughts, but they are subject to revision. Who knows? Do you want to discuss the tournament right now, or do you want to discuss the season? Which do you want to talk about first?
The tournament.
Okay.
Let's focus on that now, and then we'll get into the rest of this of season 40.
Okay. I'm ready. What do you?
Just your headline reactions, the most important things you have to say.
Okay. To pick up on the fact you said 27 people qualified. So I felt that because of that, it was actually less stringent criteria. You didn't have in past years, you basically had 5-time winners and maybe 4-time winners. And it would take more than a year necessarily for that to occur. This year, I think they wanted to get it in within a year, and you had so many different types of champions. So you might have thought, oh, it's not going to be that great. But overall, I thought it was quite an exciting tournament. And then one of those differences is because you have 27 entrants, you don't need the wild card element. You just have 27. You have 9 first round people. So then you go into three semifinals.
Right, and let me clarify. When my dad said wild card, he means he's referring to in past Tournament of Champions when someone high scorers who didn't win their opening round matchups advanced to the semifinals. He's not referring to Champions Wild Card, right, which is one of the new tournaments that debuted this season.
Right. And that removed a fun element and also a betting strategy, but you just had to accept that. And they possibly could have included that, but then you would have had more rounds too. So it was just straightforward. You had to win your round and get in there. Then you had then the 3 semifinal rounds, and then you had the three champions. Now in the past, as Jeff said, you had a different, fairly new format. You could have had just a 2-day championship.
A 2-day total point affair, right, as Alex always said.
Right. So your strategy really changes. And I think it was valid, and it was fun. And it was I felt the final was quite exciting, well played. And there were several perfect rounds. I'm not sure how many times Ken noted that, where every question was answered. There were no incorrect answers at all.
Well, I think there might have been, I think by perfect he meant every clue was answered correctly in the round, but there might have been someone might have buzzed in and given a wrong answer, and then someone followed up with the correct.
Every answer was correctly questioned.
Yes.
And don't you recall that? I think that happened more than once, which is impressive, especially because the questions and answers are more difficult for the Tournament of Champions. You can tell that. So it was impressive. The contestants that had made it were really impressive, and probably the ones that deserved it. But with that format, I think that encouraged the go for broke strategy. You noticed that, I don't want to say every time, but almost every daily double was they bet everything. I don't want to say it happened every time, but it's probably 90%.
For the whole tournament or for the finals?
In the finals.
Yeah.
In the finals, that Troy, Rogesh, and Ben bet all their money. Possibly on the second daily double of Double Jeopardy, there might have been once or twice where they didn't bet at all. But now, obviously, these guys are bigger bettors, and the circumstances would push them to that. But I think it was also because of the format of the tournament. It encouraged you to go big. You were not saving any money. You had to win each day. So it encouraged that. So the tournament was all about looking for the daily doubles and betting everything, with most of these guys figuring they were likely to win, to know that answer. Most of the time they got it. And so the game came down to who got the daily doubles in most cases, not not just who who was answering most of the questions. So it was control of the board and having the luck of getting the daily doubles. However, that's not always the case, and Jeopardy also comes down to who knows Final Jeopardy. My personal preference was I liked Troy the most. I was hoping he would win. He just seemed to not. He did not do as well in Final Jeopardy. The results were Yogesh 3 wins, Ben 2 wins, and Troy 1 win. But Troy really did better than that. And I checked it, and Yogesh had the most correct answers over the 6 games. Troy was quite close to him, and Ben was way behind, but he had 2 wins, and he just seemed to have an uncanny knack he got a lot more Final Jeopardies, or he got them when it mattered. Mm-hmm. So obviously betting and getting those Final Jeopardies comes into play too. But it was really coming down to getting your daily doubles and having the luck of those and controlling it. So it was a little predictable, but it was still exciting.
Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to bring up, outside of the finals, I thought, to me, the most historic moment, I mean, we'll see how it goes down, but I predict the most historic moment of this Tournament of Champions was the inclusion of the celebrity tournament winner, mm-hmm. Ike Barinholtz. And for years, there had been speculation, if a celebrity played on regular Jeopardy, how would they do? Because Celebrity Jeopardy, the clues are famously dumbed down. Yeah. But, I thought Ike and a handful of other celebrity contestants had acquitted themselves well and made it seem like they could potentially handle the tougher material. And, so Ike actually gets invited to this year's Tournament of Champions. So that's like an upgrade on 2 levels, not just regular Jeopardy, but the Tournament of Champions. And he managed to pull out a victory in his opening game. And, that it's just one game so far, but he proved that, a celebrity is capable of handling regular Jeopardy. So did you have any reaction to that, Ted?
I was pleased with that and proud, because it could be embarrassing. And I think he set a precedent now that if it was a celebrity who did poorly, they might have said, we're not going to do this anymore. So,
yeah, well, I know Lisa Ann Walter, she's the most recent celebrity tournament winner, and that her final aired before this year's Tournament of Champions started airing, and she was already invited for the next Tournament of Champions. So, if Ike had played poorly after that, well, then the discussion might have been, what's going to happen with Lisa Ann on the next one? Well, but now she has something to live up to.
Yeah.
All right. So I think I was listening to the Inside Jeopardy podcast recently, and Michael Davies, the executive producer, I think he revealed plans for having Tournament of Champions in subsequent years regularly in February or March, like this time of year, basically, and having whatever field that would give them from the past year. So I don't think he gave he didn't give specifics in terms of the number of contestants there would be, but what kind of format would you like to see next year? Because I would guess, with the shorter turnaround, that would mean we might go back to 15 contestants, or what do you think will happen?
Yeah, like I said, I prefer the wild card. Like I said, there's been so many tournaments, and soon after this, well, I guess just before this, I forget where it was, they had like a Masters, and you had some really established champs come on and didn't do well, and Chris Panullo was one of them, and I forget some of the others, and they lost in their first round.
Well, that Chris was in the Tournament of Champions where he lost in the first round.
Was that was this one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Why was he in that?
Because
he was this year?
Yeah, well, I think the last Tournament of Champions was more than a year ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it was
that's
the last Tournament of Champions was the one with Amy and Andrew and what's his name, the Steve Martin lookalike, Sam. I think that was the final of the last TOC.
All right, that's what I lost track. There were a couple others. There were some major, some double-digit winners that didn't advance too far in this, and I think if they had gotten into if they had the wild card, they would have had that opportunity. So I always like the wild card. There, it gives you that second day to advance. Again, I understand the 27 contestants gave them the push that format. So for the next year, if they're getting back to their regular format, it would take a while to get the 4 and 5 day, and I think you'd have it would take you at least a year to get 15. So I would push for the wild card. Jeff, I was going to ask you, which for the final round, which do you think they're going to do? Do you think they've now made that transition to the best first to reach 3, or are they going to do the 2-day?
I get the sense from Michael Davies that he, with the way he's come in and shaken things up, that he prefers the first to 3, but that he's open to ideas and willing to see how reactions go, and he's not against going back to the 2-day total format. And they still have used that in other tournaments, like they used it in the second chance and the Champions wild card. So
it obviously takes longer. You have to slot a maximum of 7 days for that. It would take from 3 to 7 days for that, as opposed to just knowing that you take 2 days.
Yeah.
So you have to be flexible.
Right. Okay. And any final thoughts on this year's TOC before we talk about the rest of the season?
No. Yes. Just the final thought is, it ended up exceeding my expectations. Like I said, there were some. The overall season itself was a little disappointing, and because of some of the upsets, I was a little upset or whatever. But when we got down to it, I thought it was well played and exciting, and deserved to be up there with a lot of the past Tournament of Champions.
Okay, well, I think I agree with much of that. But as I teased a bit, where the season 40 will, I guess, go down in history as the year of tournaments for Jeopardy, because it's partly to do with Michael Davies shaking up the format with his new ideas, but the more immediate reason was the Writers Guild of America strike, which affected the taping of the beginning of the season. So Jeopardy's writers, they, along with other TV writers, they were on strike, but the show wanted to produce new episodes, so they kind of came up with a compromise, like, we'll use clues that have been previously written for earlier episodes that haven't been used. I think they may have recycled some clues that were used in earlier episodes, but they didn't want new contestants to have old clues, so they did Second Chance Tournament again. They debuted that the previous season, and they debuted the Champions Wild Card, so they brought in like 1 or 2 or 3 game champions, or people who didn't win but looked impressive from the past couple seasons, and their original appearances have been affected by COVID-19 protocols. they're not as much of an issue anymore. They have the full studio audience. So yeah, so they had multiple editions of the Second Chance tournament, multiple editions of the Champions Wild Card, all leading up to the Tournament of Champions, and coming right after the Tournament of Champions, they had the Jeopardy Invitational Tournament with a selection of notable past champions from whatever year. And I believe when the Invitational Tournament wraps up, that's when we'll finally go back to new contestants. So I've been on the Jeopardy Reddit. I've been on other places where I've seen this reaction. I've had discussions with you and Mom and other people throughout the year. But what's your general feelings about season 40 and all these tournaments?
I I thought there were too many tournaments. And when I talked to you at the beginning of the year, I thought that's how they were going to start the year. I understood. It makes sense. Obviously, you've got the writer's strike, but it got settled. And I thought halfway through the year, they were going to start bring in new contestants. And
yeah, well, I think they locked in the schedule. Like once they knew the strike was going to affect things, they locked in the schedule for the next several months. And even though the strike ended, they'd already committed.
They were committed to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I just felt that, and I follow the game closely, but I would get confused. I'd say, wait a second, this is second chance or wild card, or which kind of tournament is it now? And I didn't think they made a real good explanation, or Jeopardy, the show, didn't make a great effort at explaining the difference and who was who. And then even when you came to the Tournament of Champions, in past years, I felt like there was a little embarrassment. In past years when they'd introduce people, so-and-so is a 5-time champ. This person is is an 11-time champ, and they'd show their winnings and stuff. This year, they didn't say so-and-so is a second-time champ or a wild card champ. I didn't think they made that obvious. Like I don't
think they said it at the beginning in their introductions at the beginning of the episode. I think Ken mentioned that during like the contestant interviews.
Yeah, but right, it wasn't obvious. They didn't, they could have. It's like they're not proud of it or whatever. But I just thought there were. I had tournament fatigue because everything was a tournament, and when everything's a tournament, then a tournament's not a big deal.
Yeah,
and it's Jeopardy, and it's not just the Jeopardy tournament. That's not what the show is. So I'll be glad to get back, and then you're bringing people back, and there's almost like a professionalization of Jeopardy.
Well, Michael Davis has kind of talked about that. Like he thinks of Jeopardy as a sport, and he kind of does. He likes how it's become professionalized and how people study for it and prepare. And he wants to keep having the greatest players.
Yeah, you have that
come back.
Right, you have that community. You have the, there obviously there is a community of trivia players and that, and then you have. But I think Jeopardy is also part of the popularity of it is everyone watching at home thinks. Not everyone, but so many people that watch at home think I can get on the show. And now if they're watching it and say, wait a second, I couldn't get on this year, and now there's a backlog of people. And there's some loss of the democratization of Jeopardy and all. And if they don't get back to that, and they don't just want to watch, these are the people that go from game show to game show and from all the trivia leagues and whatever, I think there's some erosion or possibility of the erosion of the popularity, and I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, I think I can see I mean, I do like seeing some of these great players come back, so I do see the appeal of the professionalization of it, but it is a loss to not have the mass appeal, the mass availability of it. So it does feel like they're trying to strike the right balance. And this year, based on what Michael Davies and other Jeopardy producers have said, like, this is not going to be a typical season going forward.
Yeah. I can give them a break for this year, but I really think next year they should get back to.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to mention some other thing. While I was similarly fatigued by the tournaments, there is a tournament that hasn't been played in a while that I would like to see return, and that's the teen tournament. I don't know how many years it's been since the last one, and we had a couple of former teen tournament players return for the invitational tournament. So there's definitely the show hasn't forgotten that they once had that tournament, and I think it's been even longer since they had Kids Week, where the like 9-year-olds to 12-year-olds. But yeah, so I'd like to see those return, but not at the expense of regular games, of course. Do you have any other desires for next season?
No, basically just getting back to the regular. When will it start? In September or
the next season? Yeah. I think the seasons always officially start, I think, like a week after Labor Day is typical.
Yeah. I'd rather just get back to the regular. They have, at prime time, they have Celebrity. I think that's where you could have some of the Masters and Invitational tournaments.
The Masters tournament, that was in prime time last year as well. And I think they're doing that again, I believe, this May.
Yeah. That's where I would do that. And you still have the room for the other tournaments. You have the teachers and like you said, the teens and the student. And they didn't have any of those this year, did they?
No. Well, because they had just all the second chance in the wild card, and then in prime time it was just Celebrity so far. Yeah.
No, just one other comment is, even if those were recycled questions, it didn't. You don't remember them if they were 20 years ago or whatever. Well, it didn't seem like questions were still pretty tough. And
well, they recycle a lot of stuff anyway. Like there are certain topics that come up all the time, like Shakespeare clues and world capital clues, and there's only so many ways to phrase them.
They're restated and all, but you don't remember specifically how that was asked.
Okay, well, we've been talking for nearly a half hour. My mouth is getting a little dry.
I would just also say to Jeff Smith, don't worry, this didn't count as a full-fledged appearance on That's Entertainment, did it? That's Auntertainment?
No, I don't. I don't. So you're at 4 appearances, I believe, for full-length episodes. Jeff's not that close behind you. He was on. I think he has 2 full-length appearances so far. So I'd have to look back over records to see if there's anyone hot behind you with 3. But you're still close to being our first 5-timer. But I believe you also have the most mini episode guest appearances. But so that's Jeff Smith, my friend and previous guest on the March Madness and Super Bowl commercials episdes.
And he's made a couple other appearances, has he?
Yeah, well, he's since we did the March Madness episode. Now we've done a tradition of just doing an annual March Madness recap as well. So that'll be coming soon.
All right.
Actually, that might be the next episode. All right. Yeah, it should.
All right. Well, just good luck with your pools.
Yes. Hopefully, not everyone's bracket has been busted too much, but bracket busting makes me feel good.
Okay. Well, long live Jeopardy.
Yes, and since Aunt Beth isn't here, I will say on behalf of her, what is good night, even if you're listening in the morning, and keep your remotes handy and your eyes open.